Good evening. Welcome to News Plus. I'm TGK Andre.
And I'm Barbara Sam.
Let's take a quick look at the top headline stories this evening. Trump announces Nippon Steel's new investment plan in U.S. steel. Prime Minister Trudeau caught on hot mic. NIH announces cut to indirect research costs, potential savings estimated at $4 billion. Former swimmers file lawsuit against University of Pennsylvania, others over transgender athlete participation. These and more stories in the news. In a new development, President Donald Trump announced on Friday that Japan's Nippon Steel will abandon its $14.1 billion bid to acquire U.S. Steel. Instead, the company will invest heavily in U.S. Steel, without taking a controlling stake in the iconic American steel producer. The announcement was made during a joint press conference with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at the White House. President Trump expressed his support for the decision, stating, "Nippon Steel is going to be doing something very exciting with U.S. Steel. They'll be looking at an investment rather than a purchase. U.S. Steel is very important to us, and it has been a cornerstone of American industry for many years." While the president did not provide specifics on the nature of the proposed investment, he stressed that the focus was to keep U.S. Steel independent. He also emphasized the psychological importance of maintaining American ownership in such a critical sector. President Trump also mentioned that he and other officials would meet next week with Nippon Steel's leadership to iron out the details of the deal. The president had previously expressed opposition to Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel, as outlined in a Truth Social post from December 2024, where he called the acquisition a threat to U.S. industry. Nippon Steel's proposal to give the U.S. government veto power over any changes to U.S. steel production's capacity was one of the conditions meant to address national security concerns. The adjustment was a direct response to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which had raised concerns about potential reductions in U.S. steel output and workforce. Last month, Nippon and U.S. Steel filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court, challenging the Biden administration's rejection of the deal. They argue that the decision was politically motivated and violated their due process. The Trump administration now faces the task of navigating this complex issue, as domestic steel producers and labor unions continue to express concerns about the impact of foreign ownership on American industry and jobs. Watch this.
Nissan's going to be doing something very exciting about U.S. Steel. They'll be looking at an investment rather than a purchase. We didn't like the idea. U.S. Steel is a very important company to us. It was the greatest company in the world for 15 years, many years ago, 80 years ago. And we didn't want to see that leave. And it wouldn't actually leave, but the concept, psychologically not good. So they've agreed to invest heavily in U.S. Steel as opposed to own it. And that sounds very exciting. And we're going to meet with Nissan next week, the head of Nissan, very great company, and they'll work out the details. I'll help. I'll be there to mediate and arbitrate.
Honestly, one of the beautiful things about having a businessman as the president of the United States is that he knows how to do good business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've seen it with the tariffs, we've seen it in negotiations, and now we're seeing it in another negotiation. And as he's sitting there discussing with the Prime Minister of Japan, you can see that this is somebody who cares deeply about his country. Before President Trump came into office, there were different concerns about whether he would seek to line his own pockets, he would seek to extract money from the government. There were claims of the things that he did with Mar-a-Lago in his first term being ways to add money and value to his property. But now you see with what he's doing with the Department of Government Efficiency, that he's trying to help the government save money and get the best deal wherever possible. We've seen Canada pledge $1.3 billion to their border defense. We've seen Mexico send 10,000 troops the same day to the border and pledge more funding to combat the fentanyl epidemic that's happening in the United States. Clearly, when you need business to happen, it's probably best to get a businessman and not a career politician who's used to being paid by businessmen,
Yeah.
or as we know them, lobbyists,
Lobbying.
to get deals done.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is a great deal for U.S. Steel.
Yeah.
This is a great deal for America.
Yes, it is.
And Nippon Steel, although they don't know it now, this will be a great deal for them because you never know. There may be a time when the U.S. steel industry is looking to do a deal and you already have a favorable relationship with Nippon Steel. So the investment of them not buying up U.S. Steel, but
It's
instead
better.
of investing,
Yeah.
could actually benefit them in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with you, TGK. And this also resonates with what President Trump said during his inauguration. He's making America great again, bringing back jobs, also helping to ramp up the automotive industry. We can see that he's also working to ramp up this steel industry, because keep in mind that the 1940s, 50s, 60s, those industrial plants was a big part of driving American economy. So having this steel production in America, instead of having an ownership, foreign ownership, we're getting away from that a lot. We're having an investor. So having complete total control versus an investor, foreign investment, is a great move. And it shows that President Trump is really fulfilling his promise and making America great, bringing back jobs and opening up industries across the U.S.
100%. And pun intended, it's great to have a man of steel, a man of resolve, especially when you're dealing with something like U.S. Steel. And one of the beautiful things that I noticed during the press conference is that a lot of people like to call the president a bully, that he likes to get his way forcefully. But there was a time during the press conference when a reporter was asking Prime Minister Shiba, the Prime Minister of Japan, a question, and the Prime Minister responded, "I don't answer theoretical questions." And you can see President Trump there. As soon as Prime Minister Shiba was done talking, he said, "Oh, that's smart. This guy's really good." So you're seeing him get along with these other foreign leaders.
Yes, that's important.
Very important. Even when he's talking about them going from investing in a controlling stake to just being an investor. So even there, you're seeing good rapport being built, which only spells good things for the future of the United States in foreign relations.
Yeah, that's good diplomacy across the world.
Great
and it's
diplomacy.
Really important, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was overheard on a hot mic Friday making remarks about President Donald Trump's repeated suggestions that Canada could become the 51st U.S. state. The comments made during a closed-door session with business and labor leaders were accidentally broadcast by a loudspeaker, drawing attention from media outlets and political observers. According to sources, Prime Minister Trudeau expressed concern that President Trump's interest in annexing Canada is driven by the desire to access the country's critical mineral resources. He stated, in quote, "Mr. Trump has it in mind that the easiest way to do it is absorbing our country, and it's a real thing," and end quote. Trudeau was heard saying before the microphone cut out. This incident follows President Trump's repeated comments about Canada potentially becoming a U.S. state, including a controversial post on Truth Social in December, where he referred to Prime Minister Trudeau as the governor of the great state of Canada. Earlier in the week, President Trump had also floated the idea in the Oval Office, suggesting that Canada could become the 51st state if it made the right concessions to avoid tariffs, such as stopping illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking. In response to President Trump's tariffs threat, Trudeau stressed the importance of Canada thinking tactically and strategically in dealing with U.S. pressures. He emphasized the need to work with the U.S. to avoid punitive tariffs, while also strengthening Canada's own trade relationships and reducing internal trade barriers. Let's take a look.
And it is a real thing. In my conversation with him.
Later, when asked about Trudeau's comments on the sideline of the summit and whether Ottawa was concerned that Trump's annexation threat was genuine, Industry Minister Francois Philippe said no one can question the sovereignty of Canada. This comes as his government has vowed the country's sovereignty was non-negotiable. Trudeau called the summit of business and labor leaders to coordinate a response to Trump's looming threat of a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. In opening remarks at the summit, Trudeau said Ottawa would continue to work to address Trump's concerns about fentanyl and migrants, even if Canada was not a major contributor to either problem in the U.S.
I think the strategic reflection we have to have right now is that we are in a moment that we have to meet for Canadians to see not just how we get through this particular challenge over the next 30 days or few months, but how we get through and thrive and grow stronger over the next 4 years and into what may be a more challenging long-term political situation with the United States. How do we make sure we are resilient as an economy? And for me, there's 3 areas we need to think about: Canada, the United States, and international.
The tariffs, they are a penalty that can cripple Canada's economy. Trump's tariffs
on Canada could mean that the price of goods imported from Canada could drive and be reflected in consumer costs and the consumer consumption. However, Prime Minister Trudeau submitted his resignation several months ago. So we'll see if the new Prime Minister that's taking his position is willing to have discussions and open dialogue with President Trump about annexing Canada. We don't know. This is an entire country that you're talking about adding to the U.S. Is not just a territory across Canada. It's an entire country that's you're merging to the United States. So we'll see. TGK, what is your take on it?
I mean, honestly, I feel like Quebec is great around this time of year. Personally, I have a few friends in Calgary and British Columbia
Toronto, myself.
that I would like to see easier without having to apply for a visa. So I feel like it would be great to annex Canada as a 51st state. But of course, on a more serious note, you know, the differences between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump aren't new to many. And of course, President Trudeau probably would have preferred not to have been caught on the hot mic saying what he was saying. But it poses an interesting question. I mean, we've seen President Trump talk about taking Greenland. And now we're seeing him talk about taking Canada as well. It seems that the president has a plan in mind for with all this land that he wants. The question just is what exactly for? And who knows, with how open and transparent the president is and how open and transparent this administration is looking, we might get an answer sooner rather than later.
I would say maybe it's a defense move to have Canada a part of the U.S. to increase our territory of defense. We'll see what happens.
It's a great point. The National Institutes of Health, also known as the NIH, has announced that it would be implementing cuts to research grant funding by limiting the amount allocated to indirect costs to just 15%. The new directive issued by the NIH's Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, fortunately named OPERA, is part of the agency's broader efforts to streamline operations and focus more resources on direct scientific research. According to the NIH's memo, in fiscal year 2023, the agency allocated $9 billion of the $35 billion spent on research grants to indirect costs, which cover expenses such as lab space, equipment, personnel, maintenance, and operations. These indirect costs are typically negotiated between research institutions and the grantor when a scientist receives funding, with the average rate for NIH recipients currently ranging between 27 and 28%, and in some cases even higher. OPERA explained that the new 15% cap was derived by reviewing indirect cost rates at private foundations, including the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation of New York, all of which maintain caps between 10 and 15%. The agency believes this measure could save approximately $4 billion, which could then be related to direct research activities. As this policy moves forward, the effects on research funding in academic institutions remain uncertain. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the nominee for NIH director, has yet to be confirmed, with his confirmation hearing still pending. The outcome of this directive may well be shaped by the ongoing debates over the balance between cutting costs and maintaining robust research funding. Watch this.
A move expected to save $4 billion, but significantly impact universities and research institutions. Indirect costs, which cover lab space, utilities, equipment, and administrative support, currently average 27 to 28% of grant funds. The NIH cited private foundations like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Carnegie Corporation, which cap indirect funding at 10 to 15% as a model for this change. The agency emphasized its goal to maximize funds for direct scientific research, but critics argue the cuts could severely hinder research progress by shifting financial burdens onto universities.
Scientists and university officials have strongly opposed the move, warning that reduced funding for essential infrastructure could hamper biomedical research.
Insane, said Jeffrey Flyer, former dean of Harvard Medical School.
Crude and poorly thought out, Michael Eisen of UC Berkeley criticized it.
Opponents fear universities won't have the resources to compensate for lost funding, potentially leading to fewer research projects and slowed innovation. Meanwhile, Trump appointee Katie Miller praised the move, calling it a crackdown on excessive administrative spending. With no confirmed NIH director, the debate over the policy is expected to intensify, particularly during Dr. Jay Bhattacharya's upcoming Senate confirmation hearings.
Honestly, all I can say is good for the NIH. Like the report said and like what you heard, you have these universities with these large endowments. When I say large, I mean GDP of small nations large. And all of a sudden there's complaints that instead of them spending 60% on overhead, it has to come down to 15%. And like I mentioned earlier in the program, this administration is focused on efficiency. And efficiency is what should be focused on, as you'll learn and hear more of later in the program. So when you hear these different universities talking about it's too much, the amount that they're cutting down is too gross, it's almost like a child who has a playroom full of toys, complaining that you're taking away
some of the
10%, because somebody else might need it. So it's one of those things that when you're looking at it at first glance on the surface, it seems, well, the government, is playing selfishly. The government is just trying to be cheap and cut costs. But when they're saying that it's trying to go towards, it's not like they're pulling the money away for no reason. They're pulling away indirect costs. And for those at home, if you're not sure what indirect costs are, think of it like this. You want to plan a research study, and you need funding. So you have direct costs, which may be the materials needed. It may be the funds needed to get participants. It may be different things. And you have indirect costs like lab space. You have indirect costs like staff and equipment. To which the issue is that these indirect costs are needed, but to what amount?
Yeah.
And sometimes when you have a budget that's not so stringent, you can tend to go overboard because you have more to spend.
Yeah, it's true.
So instead of being careful with the equipment that you have, or instead of keeping a tight group
budget
of staff,
Yeah.
And again, like they said, most institutions like the Carnegie Mellon Institution and the Rockefeller Institution typically keep indirect costs at 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is unprecedented, but you have these institutions like the small researchers and the universities where, since they know that they're getting this funding, they can allocate these huge amounts to indirect costs, and they know that, well, there's a lot more leeway to play with.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not agreeing wholly with it, but I can't say that it's something that's not understood because, again, they're not pulling the money out of the program. They're redirecting the money from indirect costs to direct costs.
Yeah.
So things that contribute directly to the program. So at the end of the day, the money is still going into the research,
It's just not as
in a
much.
more efficient
Yeah.
and focused way.
Yeah, it's true. It's good. 3 former University of Pennsylvania swimmers, Grace Estabrook, Margaret Squassowitz, and Ellen Holmquist, have filed a lawsuit against the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, the NCAA, and the Ivy League Council of Presidents. The lawsuit claims that allowing transgender swimmer Leah Thomas to compete on the women's team caused them significant emotional distress and violated federal law. The plaintiffs argue that their participation in the team was compromised by Thomas's inclusion, which they said created an unfair competitive environment. They are seeking to have Thomas's records vacated and eligibility on the women's team nullified. The lawsuit further alleged that UPenn pressured the swimmers to accept Thomas's participation, even suggesting counseling for those who expressed concerns. The plaintiffs claimed that the university created a culture of intimidation, warning them against speaking out, fearing they would be labeled as transphobic, and that it could negatively affect their future job prospects. This legal action comes shortly after President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning biological males from competing in women's sports, threatening to cut federal funding to institutions that allow such participation. Let's take a look.
Are suing the school, claiming they were discriminated against and allegedly denied equal opportunities to compete. The suit focuses on the 2022 Ivy League Women's Championships, where transgender athlete Leah Thomas won 4 first-place medals and set multiple records. Others mentioned in the suit include the NCAA, the Ivy League, and Harvard University.
Their dreams were broken, shattered by having to compete against a male.
Attorney Bill Brock is one of 3 attorneys representing the women. The Independent Council on Women's Sports is funding the lawsuit. They show the women filing the suit as Carmel resident Grace Estabrook, who grew up swimming for Carmel Swim Club, Margot Kazarowski of New Jersey, and Ellen Holmquist of Connecticut.
We want the rightful placements of all the women that competed restored.
That means if their lawsuit is successful, Thomas's record would be vacated. The University of Pennsylvania nominated Leah Thomas for the NCAA Woman of the Year award. Brock says the lawsuit is about fairness, so transgender athletes like Thomas won't be able to compete.
Jumped from 553rd place in the 500-yard freestyle to NCAA championship on the women's side. That's not fair. That knocked a woman off of the podium.
Brock says this is not an attack on transgender inclusion.
Inclusion's important, and that's why we have women's sports, because it's not fair for women not to have the opportunity to compete against women and have a level playing field.
Karen?
I applaud the women that came forward and filed this lawsuit against these institutions because they were forced and bullied into accepting competing against a man in women's sports. He went on to receive 4 medals for his, his competition in the sports and swimming specifically. And he already comes naturally, biologically, with an advantage. He's stronger, he's faster, he has certain hormones that are completely different from women. So that gives him a competitive edge. So I applaud the women for standing up for what's right. TGK?
I mean, you made some good points. And the interesting thing is what the man at the end of the video said, that Leah Thomas was 553rd place, if I recall the numbers correctly, when competing against men. But now you jumped competing against women. And honestly, it's almost laughable to hear it. Yeah. You know, now you jumped competing against women and you go up to first place and you think that that's natural.
It's not. Yeah, it's easier for you to win because your competition is not the same as competing against men.
Well put, and you look at this in other sports. For example, some people say, well, maybe transgender women just shouldn't be allowed to compete in contact sports or physical sports. But for example, you look at a sport like tennis, where, you have the men's class and you have the women's class. Yeah. And in the men's class, there's been a debate about who's the greatest tennis player of all time. Some may say Roger Federer, some may say Rafael Nadal, some may go old school and say Borg or Agassi. Most correct people would say Novak Djokovic. But then you also look at the women's side, and one of the more popular tennis players of all time, Serena Williams. Serena Williams herself will tell you that as a woman, she is the best tennis player of all time. And if she wouldn't tell you, she should tell you, because she is. But she knows, and she said it before in a public interview, that competing against men is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
As strong as she is competing against women, the men hit faster. The men serve faster.
Yeah.
The men run faster.
They were built and designed
There's just different advantages that they have. In fact, to the point where, and I mean this with all due respect, you could probably take a man from the tennis top 200, and in tennis there have been a few battle of the sexes, because this is where the argument has been had in the past before. You can take a man who's ranked top 200 and put them against a top 10 tennis player, and that man probably has an advantage just biologically.
Yeah, because he's a man.
Because he's a man.
Yeah.
So it's unfair for these women who are training against their own competition to now have to go and face someone of a, not necessarily a greater class, but someone who has just, I mean, a better and a bigger biological advantage.
Yeah.
It's nonsensical to even consider it. Going from 553rd to first.
That's a huge difference. It's a huge gap.
I mean, no, because if we're going at that rate, then why don't we also just eliminate the age requirements in sports?
But also going back to his ranking, that also shows you how low performance or how bad he was as a competitor in his own like gender class, you know? 500 to now #1 because you're competing against women. So I'm happy that President Trump has took a stand to ban transgenders competing in women's sports. Transgender men and transgender women competing against the same opposing sex in the same sport. I'm so happy that this law has been passed.
I agree, and I'm happy, like you said, for the women who are standing up.
Yeah.
And, you know, I want to thank President Trump for giving them a platform to stand on.
Yeah.
And to wrap this up in a sense, there have been different waves of the feminist movement. And I'm not saying that I support the feminist movement, but women have had to have worked a long way to get to where they are now.
I
Especially
agree
in the
with
United
you.
States, with different things like voting rights, from Elizabeth Cady Stanton to women just being paid better in the workplace. So it's quite unfortunate sometimes the way that the LGBTQIA plus movement gets looped in with women's rights, because now you have men entering women's spaces trying to take advantage of the rights that women fought for.
Yeah. As a woman.
As a woman.
Yeah.
So women, to all of the women who are fighting and demanding that their voices be heard concerning these transgender matters, good for you. We'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we'll take a look at some of the stories that made the headlines last week.
The golden age of America begins right now. America's decline is over. We will be working to meet every crisis with dignity and power and strength. We will move with purpose and speed to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day. In everything we do, my administration will be inspired by a strong pursuit of excellence and unrelenting success. America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth. I am with you. I will fight for you, and I will win for you. We will not be conquered. We will not be intimidated. We will not be broken, and we will not fail. From this day on, the United States of America will be a free, sovereign, and independent nation. We will stand bravely. We will live proudly. We will dream boldly, and nothing will stand in our way because we are Americans. The future is ours, and our golden age has just begun.
Welcome back. And if you don't know, today is Sunday, February 9th, which in the United States is pretty much Super Bowl Sunday. So right now, as we are on set, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs are playing in the Super Bowl in New Orleans. That's about what, that's about 6 hours from here or so?
Yeah, by drive, 45-minute flight.
And honestly, I'm looking at the update and I can't believe what I'm seeing. The Philadelphia Eagles are up 24-0 on the three-time, but back-to-back Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, even if you had the utmost faith in the Philadelphia Eagles, I don't think anybody could have predicted them going up 24-0. I mean, I'm reading the news. I'm sorry, because I'm reading the news and I'm trying to keep my composure. But when I go check the update, it's 24-0.
Okay, TGK, you're excited about the Super Bowl. You're excited about your team, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. If I recall correctly, they also played last year together, right, in the Super Bowl?
No.
Okay, they didn't. Okay, that goes to show you I'm not a sports girl. But you know also what's so interesting about this Super Bowl and what makes it so special? That President Donald Trump is the first president to attend a Super Bowl, which is huge.
Yes, the first sitting president.
Yes, the first sitting president in the position as president, leading the nation. He is attending the Super Bowl in New Orleans right now. So that is a huge issue, and that's a big deal. A lot of people are excited about that. I can just imagine the amount of security detail and the security presence that's there, seeing, you know, what happened a couple of months ago, several weeks ago with this incident in New Orleans. So I'm sure that the city is very protected. There's a lot of people that travel from all across the country to attend. So a lot of excitement.
100%. And my only hope for the second half, you know, is just that the president gets a lot more entertainment. Because, I mean, as I'm here, you know, obviously, as I'm taking the news, I'm not participating. But at least when I went home to watch the highlights, I would expect something better than 24-0 at halftime. And this is coming from a team that went 15-2 in the regular season.
Okay.
But as much as I'm a football fan, not an Eagles fan or a Chiefs fan, let's get back to the news, because right now this Super Bowl is not, I mean, it's not news, apparently. This is just a blowout.
You're excited about the game, but in New Orleans, there's really great food. So it's an opportunity for a lot of small businesses, a lot of local businesses to just reap the benefits of having that amount of tourism that's there. It's a great economic opportunity for a lot of businesses.
You got to get the jumbo, you got to get the
gumbo,
jambalaya.
the etouffee,
oh, yeah, of
all
course,
of those
yeah, the
great
shrimp
things.
etouffee, the crawfish etouffee. I could talk a lot about Louisiana food, though, as you can tell. I won't. Moving on. President Donald Trump has announced the formation of a presidential commission tasked with protecting religious liberty across the United States. The commission, he stated, will work to ensure that faith-based freedoms are upheld in all areas of society. We will protect Christians in our schools, in our military, in our government, in our workplaces, hospitals, and in our public squares, Trump declared, emphasizing his administration's commitment to defending religious rights. And we will bring our country back together as one nation under God. As part of this initiative, Trump also plans to sign an executive order directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to address concerns about anti-Christian bias within federal agencies. The order aims to eliminate perceived discrimination against Christian organizations and strengthen their legal protections. The move comes amidst ongoing debates about the role of faith in public life, with supporters praising the effort as a necessary step to safeguard religious expression. The commission will be expected to work closely with religious leaders, policymakers, and advocacy groups to ensure that protections for faith-based communities remain a central part of the administration's agenda. Watch this.
To confront such weaponization and religious persecution, today I'm signing an executive order to make our Attorney General, who's a great person, she's going to be a great Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the head of a task force, brand new, to eradicate anti-Christian bias. About time, right? Anti-Christian bias. Yeah, you never heard of that one before, right? But it's about time, isn't it, though, really? So many times you hear, but you don't hear the anti-Christian bias. The mission of this task force will be to immediately halt all forms of anti-Christian targeting and discrimination within the federal government, including at the DOJ, which was absolutely terrible, the IRS, the FBI, terrible, and other agencies. In addition, the task force will work to fully prosecute anti-Christian violence and vandalism in our society and to move heaven and earth to defend the rights of Christians and religious believers nationwide. You've never had that before, but this is a very powerful document I'm signing. You got it now. First time you've had it. If we don't have religious liberty, then we don't have a free country. We probably don't even have a country. This week, I'm also creating the White House Faith Office, led by Pastor Paula White, who is so amazing.
There's been some criticism in recent reports about Trump's order to target anti-Christian bias amongst the federal government. But the thing that people have to understand, especially the people at home, is the fact that the United States promotes freedom of religion. But some people are taking this as Trump saying, well, he's going to boost just the Christian faith alone. But it seems that in his wisdom, pun intended, he's realized that there have been anti-Christian biases in the government. So specifically, out of every religion that a person can practice in the United States, which is pretty much almost any religion, the Christian religion seems to be the one that's been targeted the most. In a story that I covered earlier in the week, there was a teacher who was released or suspended by the school board for a crucifix that was in her classroom. According to her, that crucifix had been in her classroom for 10 years. But due to the liberal agenda continuing and imposing on people's liberty, she was suspended from her position just for having a crucifix. She wasn't promoting the religion. She wasn't going in with a Bible and forcing kids to read. She just had it as a display of her faith. And like I said at the time, if it was any other flag, if it was a pride flag, if it was the flag of a different country, it's fine. But once it has to do with Christ and the Christian faith, all of a sudden it's an issue. If we're promoting freedom of religion, it should be for all religions. Simple as that. Isn't that right, Barbara?
I agree with you. I'm happy to see that there are certain things. I would say this. I'm happy to see that there is a protection for Christians, for Christian institutions, for Christian organizations to be able to freely speak the gospel, to have religion and prayer back in schools. That's really important. Also to just being able to know that this is a Christian country, this is a Christian nation, and that we no longer have to, maybe press ourselves down and not be so bold to proclaim the gospel, to spread the gospel, to preach the gospel. It's really important that we now have a law protecting us, because at first we were called radical Christians. You would see people preaching, you would see people sharing the gospel of God and just trying to win souls, because we are at a time, it's a critical time. And so to know that we have the Trump administration behind us, so we have so many political figures behind us, it gives me great joy and excitement to know that, yes, you don't have to hide, or you don't have to kind of like mute yourself, because so many people have done that because, oh, if you speak out against this agenda, or you speak out against something that does not align with the word of God, you are canceled, culture cancel, what is it?
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture we've been seeing, or you just receive a lot of backlash on social media if you say something that goes against what is not the word of God. So I'm happy to see this. This is exciting.
I'm very happy too. And one of the beautiful things is that this push by the government, like Trump has said many times, that he wants to bring God as a focus back to the country, is beautiful, because something that the man of God, Pastor Chris, has been talking about is, in these last days, we have to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us.
Yeah.
Because there will come a time, although the time is not now because he that letteth has not been removed, but there will come a time when we are removed that the anti-Christian bias will ravage everywhere. Yeah. And there will be a time where it'll pretty much be illegal to say the name of Jesus and to pray in public. But while we are here and we have a government that is backing the church publicly and federally, we as Christians must do our very utmost to preach the gospel like never before. And a personal anecdote that I have from this is that I think about a week or two ago, I was eating at a restaurant and I saw a woman in distress, and long story short, I ended up praying for her in the middle of the restaurant with her and her son concerning a family matter. And as she was crying into my arms at the end, all I could say was just, thank you, Father. And as I was leaving the restaurant, a cowboy-looking man came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, thank you, sir. That inspired me. I didn't know that this country was still like this. And that just went to show me, and it goes to show you that in this nation, there are people who have been waiting to see a resurgence of bold Christians spreading the gospel.
Amen.
And when you have a government
that's behind you and
that's
supporting
behind you.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you look at it throughout all of the church's history, there have not been many governments that supported the church. There were governments that persecuted the church.
Yeah, we
There
can
were
see it with the previous administration, with President Biden and President Obama.
Very much so. And when you look back to the early church and the persecution that they had to go through, for this gospel to enter our hands, and these last days, as the holders of the final baton, we have a government that is supporting us as we run our race to a glorious conclusion until we meet him in the air. And I'm telling you, with this freedom, we are taking the gospel and completing the full preaching of the gospel in the United States and in every nation around the world, in every tribe, in every occupational tribe.
In every tongue, as declared by our man of God, Pastor Chris, this is the year of completion. So glory!
Glory to God indeed.
And more news, lawmakers in both chambers of Congress have launched a coordinated effort to address nearly $3 trillion in improper government spending and payments made since 2004. The initiative, dubbed the War on Waste, is being spearheaded by the House of Oversight Committees, known as DOGE subcommittees, led by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and aims to eliminate waste, enhance oversight, and prevent fraud in federal spending. The subcommittee plans to work closely with the Trump administration to reform government payment systems and hold agencies accountable for financial mismanagement. Key areas of focus include reducing inefficiencies, improving and tracking mechanisms, and investing fraudulent expenditures to ensure that taxpayer funds are used appropriately. In the Senate, Senator Joni Ernst has established the DOGE Caucus, a bipartisan group dedicated to enforcing stricter financial oversight and advocating for reforms that will prevent further improper payments. The caucus will work alongside the House initiative to introduce legislative measures aimed at curbing wasteful spending across federal agencies. Both chambers have emphasized the need for greater transparency and fiscal responsibility, citing the long-term impact of unchecked government waste on the economy. Lawmakers stress that this effort is not only about cutting costs, but also about restoring public trust in the government's ability to manage taxpayers' money efficiently. As the initiative gains momentum, Congress is expected to hold hearings, propose legislative change, and introduce new measures to streamline federal spending, marking a significant push towards financial accountability and responsible governance. Let's take a look.
Governor Reynolds. In Iowa, the state legislature passed a bill in 2023 that lowered the number of cabinet-level departments from 37 down to just 16. So I'd like to ask you, did this make the Iowa government more efficient or less efficient?
More efficient.
I'm not surprised. Is the Iowa government still able to provide all the services your constituents require of you?
We're actually doing a better job of it and putting more money into the programs or returning it back to the taxpayers.
Amazing. It sounds like DOGE has already worked in Iowa. Has your state lost money or saved money since reorganizing its government?
$217 million, surpassing our 4-year projection in the first 18 months, and that's conservative. We're going to continue to see savings, and that's how I'm going to continue to reduce the tax burden on our taxpayers.
That is incredible. That's what all of America wants. So how do you think the federal government can translate what Iowa has done to the national level? You've already achieved it in your state. How can we replicate that?
You're doing it by bringing the private sector in, having them take a look at the inefficiencies in government, look at the systems, look at the duplication, look at the unaccountability. There's no transparency. There's no metrics. There's no data that they can point to. We're standing up Iowa DOGE. We want to be a partner in that because I think it's really important that the federal government and the state government and the local governments work together to really implement transformational change. This is an incredible opportunity. I have so much respect for President Trump to put this initiative forward. He received an undeniable mandate in this last election, as did we. We now have supermajorities in both the House and the Senate, the governor's office, and an entire Republican delegation that we've sent out to Washington, D.C. We did just what President Trump does. We told Iowans what we were going to do, and we followed through with it. And that is what Americans expect, and that is why 77 million people said that President Trump is who we want to restore America's greatness.
I absolutely agree with you, Governor Reynolds. Thank you.
We can see that having these mechanisms in place to help curb wasteful spending is a step in the right direction, and it's something that the Trump administration is taking the bull by the horns and getting in front of it, and also standing on his promises and making America great. You know, this has been emphasized all across his campaign, but now we actually see the result because taxpayers are tired of spending so much money. We've seen it in the grocery stores, we're seeing it in inflation, and now this is an opportunity to curb wasteful spending of taxpayer dollars. TGK?
I can't agree more. As a taxpayer, this is money that's coming out from my check.
Yeah.
This is money that's coming out when I pay for something. Even if I win the lottery,
it's the taxes.
It's still taxed.
You have to pay taxes on everything in the U.S.
Exactly. So if I'm paying taxes, I understand that it's going for a good cause. Mm-hmm. It's going towards roads, it's going towards public education, it's going towards subsidizing the cost of living for others. Yeah. But when it's being used improperly, then am I paying my taxes improperly? Because if there's a discrepancy when I pay taxes, anything over $800 that I'm not filing, the IRS is going to come after me.
Yeah.
But somehow, the government can fail audits and everything's beautiful. There's no issue, there's nothing to check. The Pentagon can fail 7 audits in a row, spending $1 billion on the audits, and nobody bats an eye.
Wow.
But let me not report an $800 payment that was Venmo to me, and the IRS is going to be on my neck.
Right.
It's absolutely ludicrous to think about.
Yeah.
So good on these politicians for trying to curb, again, improper spending.
Yeah.
Not overspending, improper spending.
Yeah.
Because the government should strive to be as efficient as possible for the good of the people. And anybody who disagrees with this, I don't know what to tell you. If you like wasting money, that's fine, because that's your money that you earned. But the government's money is also my money, because the government's money comes from the people.
Yeah, it's true.
So since it's my money, I have a say in how I want my money to be spent. And like the politician was saying, the people who elected Donald Trump had a mandate. And we want that mandate to be met, and that is that the government funding or the government spending should be spent efficiently.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The White House has announced the cancellation of federal subscriptions to Politico and other media organizations after a review conducted by the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE. Initial claims suggested that the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID, has funded over 6,200 journalists, 707 non-state media outlets, and 279 media-focused NGOs in more than 30 countries in 2023, with $8 million going towards Politico. However, it was clarified that the actual amount from USAID was approximately $44,000, primarily for agency-wide subscriptions. The $8 million figure represents the total amount the federal government spent on Politico subscriptions across various agencies, not just USAID. While initially mute, Politico's leadership has responded by asserting their financial independence from government subsidies, framing their services as standard transactions akin to purchasing research or software. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt confirmed that the DOGE team is working to terminate these payments, emphasizing that the administration is committed to ensuring taxpayer funds are spent responsibly. Watch this.
I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer dollars that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayers' dime will no longer be happening. The DOGE team is working on canceling those payments now. Again, this is a whole of government effort to ensure that we are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books. And this president and his team are making decisions across the board on, do these receipts serve the interests of the American people? Is this a good use of the American taxpayers' money? If it is not, that funding will no longer be sent abroad, and American taxpayers will see significant savings because of that effort.
And again, like we were mentioning before, this is the government's money, which means it's the people's money. Some people may disagree, but this is what we need to get to where we are, or to get to where we need to be. Let me say that in a better sense. When you have a country that has a $36 trillion deficit, you have to tighten the reins. And I say that because we took extremes to get here. You don't end up $36 trillion in the hole by a hop, a skip, and a leap.
Yeah.
There are certain extremes in spending and careless spending that you take to get $36 trillion in debt. So the same way that the belt was loosened freely,
it needs to be tightened now.
It needs to be tightened. And of course, when it's tightened, there's going to be a squeeze. And people will feel the squeeze. And that's where some of the complaints will come from. But if you've ever seen somebody on a diet, like somebody who's just come back from Louisiana after eating all of the gumbo
From
and
the
the
Super
crawfish
Bowl.
etouffee and the jambalaya, you know, you have to get tight. You have to find out where you can cut items. And speaking analogically, because of course we all eat, you might enjoy bread. But instead of eating half a loaf a day, you go to 2 slices a day. Instead of eating a whole steak, you can go to half. So it's things like these, speaking from a government sense, that some people will say, well, it's just political. Why are we cutting it? $8 million, if the average American pays about $2,000 in taxes a year, represents thousands, if my math is correct, 4,000 Americans. So that's about the tax bill of 4,000 Americans that was spent on political subscriptions across the government.
Can you imagine that? $8 million spent on a subscription for a online media company. That is a lot of money. And I understand, like, supporting journalists in developing countries, being able to ensure that they're safe and they are providing fair and balanced reporting and conflict and crisis. But I think that number is absurd. $8 million.
Very much
absurd.
Agreed. Very much agreed.
Also, too, I just want to add, this is from the whitehouse.gov website. I want to share with you some of the examples that they consider as waste and abuse that they've listed on their website. I'm going to read this for you guys. There was $7,000 spent for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland. There was $23,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. There was $2 million spent for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. And then I'll round up with, let's see, there was also millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to fund irrigation canals, farming equipment, and even fertilizer to support the unprecedented poppy cultivation and heroin production in Afghanistan, benefiting the Taliban. This is directly on the website of whitehouse.gov.
Yeah, like you were saying, I mean, it was millions, not even thousands, it was millions of dollars. And one of the things, especially relating to Politico, is that, again, one thing that this administration has stressed on is the fact that they're going to be supporting ventures that promote the American interests. You look at different things like USAID and Politico, and you have to wonder whether they do, because there was a news story that came out that Jean Bugeaud, the CEO of what is it called? Info News, which is, if you don't know, and I spoke about this earlier, is Internews. Sorry, let me correct myself. It's called Internews, which, if you don't know, is actually a political media organization that was funded with almost $500 million by USAID.
$500 million.
And they have her on tape at the World Economic Forum, which Pastor Chris has already spoken about, saying that those who provide funding to these organizations have to be careful so that they can tighten the reins and control which type of truth gets out. So it means that the government has indirectly been funding censorship. So when you look at things like this political story, you have to put it into context. Because when you're funding these organizations, are they really there to tell the truth? Or are they there to fund agendas that go deeper than what the public actually realize? And now, just before we end the news, let's take a quick look at the weather forecast.
And to end the news today, a quick recap of the headlines. Trump announces Nippon Steel's new investment plan in U.S. steel. Prime Minister Trudeau caught on hot mic. NIH announces cuts to indirect research costs, potential savings estimated at $4 billion. Former swimmers file lawsuit against University of Pennsylvania and others over transgender athlete participation. And that's the news for News Plus today. Remember to join us same time next week. And for more news tomorrow, I'm Barbara Sam.
And I'm TTK Andre.
Good night and God bless you.